Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Southern Outdoorsman Podcast. I'm sitting here with the ginger bow hunter himself in studio. How you doing, Jacob?
Oh, doing good. I'm excited. Just got done wearing out some crappie, so it's been a great week. But this week, we on this, I guess, breakdown episode or outro, talking all things with really with Anthony Troncala, who's my uncle, who's been on the podcast a few times, along with Alan Summerford and Kyle Leibarter from Native Habitat Project. And dude, that was super fascinating. But other than that, we got a lot to talk about because it was a very fascinating episode. There's some stuff we didn't even talk about that we covered that's going to be in the video part of it.
Yeah.
And because we did a whole walkthrough of the property, and it was mind-blowing what we found out there. But what's been up to you?
What's been up to you?
What have you been up to?
Oh my gosh, the words, man.
Words is hard.
Golly. Dude, I enjoyed the episode. I don't know if we covered it a ton in the video or in the podcast, but we videoed a whole bunch of stuff out there on Anthony's property with Kyle and Alan, just going over basically what prairie he has intact on his property still. So we went and we looked at all kinds of different plants. We looked at how Anthony basically ended up cutting his property, and then just over the years, has missed some opportunities, I guess, to really make it like prime. And now he's got sweet gum, kind of encroaching on some of that prairie. He's got
Chinese privet,
some bamboo, some non-native river cane, stuff like that.
And kudzu on part of it.
And kudzu. And one of the more interesting parts about it to me was going over the native legumes and stuff. And I brought it up in the episode just because I found it really interesting, but where Alan was talking about how the fact that your bean field is not like actually growing your deer, or it's not growing your deer how you think it is, because we made the point that here in early June, the soybeans are like this tall right now. And those deer are already branching out on their antlers. They've already got brow tines, a lot of them. Yeah. And so Alan made the point like, hey, are these beans growing your deer, or is your native habitat, all these legumes and stuff that are growing, low to the ground in March when green up first happens, or is that growing your deer? Because, I mean, that's like creating like the base for them, to grow off of for the rest of the summer. I guess to put on mass and stuff.
And even Anthony said, like you're saying, because you're kind of making that gesture for the viewers, how tall those beans are. They're 3-4 inches tall, maybe.
Yeah.
The interesting thing is, even Anthony said, he's like, a month behind. They should already be at least knee high by this point. But even with that being said, those deer, the second their antlers are falling off, and in the springtime, they're starting to grow back, and they're trying to build that body weight back up, become more healthy again, build the body weight in order for them to, be able to put on their antlers and put on also just more body weight in general and kind of grow. And that was kind of really what Alan was really trying to hit hard on, is like that's the time of the year, throughout the summer too, but that's the time of year that they're really putting on all that body weight, trying to get them back up to speed to healthy body weight in order for them to put on the antlers. And it was interesting to kind of see that, because again, like all the legumes, which again, Andrew, you can talk about, what is a legume for listeners again, and kind of the similarities of just that family that kind of soybeans are coming from. But that was all over the property. There was, one area, I think there was 5 different ones within like 10 feet that the deer were all browsing on.
Yeah, and they do the same thing as a soybean does, like those native ones. They fix nitrogen into the soil, which means that they're putting nitrogen back into the soil, so it helps your soil be healthy too. And they have a high amount of protein and all this stuff that deer need. Like I don't know everything about, but I know that they're really good, and walking out there with them was just super eye-opening. It was a really fun experience. So we got all that videoed, and we're going to be working on getting that video out over the next couple weeks. And then, of course, we talked about all Hightower. That was pretty fun, going over the story of Hightower. That deer is just a huge buck, and it's all relative of where you live, but I feel like that's a big deer for most people who probably listen to this show. I mean, if not like everyone that listens to this show.
Especially in the deep south. I mean, it's not, 150, 160, 170 inch deer, but for what he is, and again, for the property it's came off of, it's extremely impressive. And especially he's like 13 and a half inches wide.
Yeah.
Scored like 139. I think it's like 6/8 after drying. For 60 days. So it is a very, very, very impressive deer. But not even that. Like, to me, that was impressive. But the really impressive thing was just how big his body was compared to all the other deer. Again, he dressed 187, and that is just incredible for that property, because every deer that I'm aware of that's been shot down there for the last 15 to 18 years. Like the biggest body deer live weight, not dressed, but live weight's probably 170 pounds ish, like in that ballpark. And he was, live weight was probably, 40 plus pounds heavier than that. Which is, again, it's kind of like an anomaly, but, kind of a big point of that conversation was how can you make that deer and that size deer the average? And build that into that's your average buck in, 6 to 7 years.
How can you be like Alan Summerford and shoot just giants all the time, man? Like drop time bucks galore, I'm telling you.
And, that's kind of the interesting about this conversation. Because, again, guys, we cover so much on the podcast that is very hunting-specific, tactic-driven content. A lot of the guys hunt public land. Some of the guys hunt private land as well. And, again, you can use a lot of these tactics on both places. But an exciting thing for us is kind of seeing behind the scenes. If you do have opportunity to own property, whether it's family property, it's your own property you personally bought, or even maybe you have a lease through a private landowner who would let you do a lot of habitat work, just what could be done outside of just planting food plots. Like the hunting industry is so heavy in planting just food plots, which are awesome. They're fun to shoot deer off of. If you hunt them right, and especially take a kid out or someone new, they can go see them from a ladder stand or a box blind, something like that. But there's so much other things that could be done in order to tremendously help out that deer herd and also help out everything else. We talked quite a bit on the episode about turkeys, and even dabbled in a little bit of quail because there used to be a lot of quail on this property as well. So it's kind of coming full circle, and to me, this is what gets me super excited because this is something that if you are a landowner, that you can actually take part in and have success with. And the amazing thing is having Alan and Kyle coming down, which are two very experienced guys when it comes to like this kind of work, is just the overall diversity of this property and how many different species are there that are truly what's building, higher quality deer on the property when it comes to body weight, when it comes to mass, when it comes to antler production, all that. And then also your doe production, heavier does and healthier does are going to produce healthier fawns. If you have healthier fawns, if they can live, they're going to have a better opportunity to be able to potentially put on, their full potential when it comes to antler growth if they're bucks. And there was a study, I don't know if we brought up in the podcast. I know I brought it up in the conversation. There was a study, I want to say Mississippi State University put on, and I'd love to maybe talk to Dr. Strickland or someone about this, where they took deer from, I think it was North Mississippi, in an area of the state that is just more known for, maybe not the greatest antler potential and smaller body size of deer. Just the average deer you'd find in the southeast. Mature bucks getting 115, 120 inches. And then they took deer from down the delta, the same thing down the delta that is much more known for, bigger antlers, bigger body size, just bigger overall deer in general. And they put them in a pen, but they kept them separate, but they put them in pens. And what they were testing for is with similar food, similar situations, low stress environments, how many generations, or even if it was possible, of how many generations would those deer start to look the same, as in the overall, body size, the antler potential, and everything. And if I remember correctly, it was 3 generations. It took 3 generations where a doe, that doe had a fawn, that fawn had a fawn, and that third fawn was the one that really produced, where those bucks, the buck fawns, looked nearly similar, as in body size.
They're not even the buck fawns, the full-grown bucks.
Yeah,
they're throwing antlers of the same caliber.
When they were able to put age on them. So it took them 3 generations roughly for them to kind of balance out or get pretty balanced, which is super fascinating. And that's what I was telling Anthony. And we I can't remember if we talked about that on the podcast, but I'm like, if you're looking 4 to 6 years down the road, if you can continue this quality of food and habitat, there's going to be deer that come and go, but there's going to be some does that decide to stay and some bucks, that kind of wander the property and, they have a lot larger home range. But I'm like, you seriously could see a huge difference. And that's what Alan talked about. Alan talked about on his farm up in Tennessee, in southern Tennessee, that when he got there, it was a beautiful oak stand. Mix of white oaks and red oaks, and they came through on parts of the property and did an extremely heavy select cut, like a savanna cut, where you have trees every 50 to 100 feet, if not even further, and allowed a lot more sunlight to come down. And that was able, in just a short period of time, they went from bucks that were weighing like 160, 170 pounds and does weighing, he was talking about in the episode, like 85 pounds for a mature doe in early season, to now they're killing, the average doe is 120 plus pounds, and the bucks have put on more weight as well. And then antler production has gone up in everything. And that just got me so excited, again, from even a small landowner, of what could be done on a property. And also just absolutely hammer that deer, that doe herd as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yep, everyone likes hammering some does too. Gives you an opportunity to get the kids out there, get some friends or whatever out there, and put a hurting on the doe herd. So get those deer numbers down. That's actually something that we talked to the guys at Land and Legacy about, is overpopulation of does too, that a lot of people don't realize what kind of problem they have with having too many does, which is, I don't know, I guess that's a subject for another time, but I've always found that pretty interesting, the fact that most people aren't shooting enough does. And some of the places that have really low deer densities across the state or really across the country end up having really good deer quality because those deer just aren't stressed for food sources or anything like that. So that's a really fascinating subject too, that we could go down a big rabbit hole on with Adam Keith or Matt Dye from Land and Legacy.
Yeah. Now, Alan brought that up on the first podcast we did with him, which was, a few weeks ago.
Yep.
Where in his property, in his part of the state of Alabama, kind of north central Alabama, that there wasn't really any deer there, very little deer, up until like the early 2000s. That's when they started coming in. And he said that was like the best time to kill absolutely just huge deer, because like those deer, there hadn't been deer in that area for so long because they've been killed out, and they were kind of trickling back in from like some higher elevation locations. And as they trickled through, they were finding locations with unbelievable browse, stuff that hadn't really been touched. Cattle hit some of it, but, cattle weren't touching a lot of it. So they had an expansion of food and high-quality food sources, and those first deer that got there were able to get massive. And he's like, that's when, a lot of those guys in that area were killing huge deer. And he's like, since then, it's kind of trickled down because the deer population went up, so the quality of food's gone down. And then he's like, that's the reason why you got to, like, hammer those deer.
Yeah.
And it's kind of funny because growing up, I don't know how it was for you guys, but, like, growing up with Anthony and Michael, Anthony's brother, we go hunt, like, some of our hunting clubs, and, like, man, they had one club down in, I want to say it was Greene County. And it was nothing to see 50 deer on a food plot, like a half-acre food plot. And, like, at one time, like, not them trickling.
They're like rabbits.
Yeah, they're like everywhere.
They're about as big as a big old swamp rabbit, too.
Yeah, they're like, does 70, 75 pounds. Like, they're tiny.
Yeah.
And, buck's 120 to 130 pounds. But it was like, it's fun. Like, oh, man, you're going to see a bunch of deer. But come to find out, like, years later, and, like, I bet so many people are like, oh, yeah, I want to have a bunch of deer on my property. But now it's kind of coming full circle. And this happened the last year of, like, how that's a detriment to, like, just overall, like, what those deer could be, potentially. Everybody talks about genetics, but, like, a lot of deer, if they had enough food, they could do a lot better than what they're doing right now when it comes to, body-wise and also antler production.
Yeah, exactly. One thing that I found pretty interesting about Anthony's property, and also it's a big part of how Anthony likes to hunt, was the whole isolated white oak thing. And especially with his property, how it sets up now, a couple of the properties next to him got clear-cut. And as I understood it, they had a whole bunch of big white oaks on them.
Giant, monster oaks.
Huge.
Yeah.
He called it virgin timber. Yeah. Like huge oak trees that were producing a lot of acorns, and now they're all gone. And Anthony has a couple big giant oaks on his place as well that are left over from when it was a cattle farm. 70 years ago?
Yeah, 50 plus. Yeah.
Yeah, just giant big oak trees, and I wanted to talk to Anthony about that, but we were a little too deep at that point.
Yeah, but no, it's interesting because, again, and his property actually has quite a few oaks. And we learned there's quite a few post oaks. You've got a couple different white oak species and some red oaks as well in the property, and most of those trees are massive. Like, they're not the size. Like, you're not getting a climber on any one of those trees on his property. They are big enough. They're actually so big that Anthony doesn't even want to put a lock on them because, you're talking about using like an 8-foot ratchet strap in order to try to get it around the tree.
Yeah.
They're huge trees. But like, that's where he's like learned that skill set of hunting isolated white oaks. And that's what, when we did an episode with him a year and a half ago, probably now, we hit on that topic of like hunting isolated white oaks and the success he's had in Alabama doing so. And he learned that on that property. But now with like one of his neighbors that owns property on both sides of him, clear cut their whole properties. And one of those properties, specifically the one that's just adjacent to his property on the western boundary, was just massive oak stand. Just some of the prettiest timber you've ever seen.
Yeah.
And now with it being cut, he's got some of the last kind of larger oaks in the area, unless you go a lot further in a couple different directions to find them. And, that's got him even more excited. And, Alan and Kyle talked about this on our walk, which people will see in the video. of, if you manage for kind of that savanna habitat, like how that oak production can actually go up, because they're not competing against any other trees for resources or anything like that. And definitely Anthony's seen that. There's a couple, like the white oaks are kind of spotty depending on, frost and everything, how they're producing. But he's got a couple of red oaks on that property that are like nearly guaranteed to be dropping.
Yeah,
and like
buddy.
that's where he's killing a lot of his deers, like around those. Like even Hightower, where he shot that buck, there's a huge red oak just down below him that always drops. And that's kind of like one of those stands that works really good all the way up through November, which again, this rut on this property is late December, early January timeframe.
Yep.
And he's had tons of success, and that's where he shot that buck. Like he was, kind of came around there, probably was feeding down below where he couldn't see him, kind of around that oak, and came up.
Yeah.
And was able to get a shot opportunity at that buck.
That's awesome, man. So is that everything you got with them? I mean, we got a lot more coming out with Alan and Kyle on video, which y'all can be looking for later this summer. But we got a scouting trip we got to talk about. Got some scouting shenanigans we got to talk about.
Yeah. No, other than that, it was fun. I mean, I would just recommend, like, if you are a landowner that listens to this property, whether it's like 20 acres or you get hundreds of acres, and not 1,000+ acres, it's worth having a guy like Alan and Kyle come out and just look at the property. They do consults. That's what we were doing. They did a consult for us, and it's fascinating just how much we learned. And Anthony, I'll say this, Anthony, when y'all left after we got done with the podcast and I hung out with him for a couple more hours, dude, he was like giddy smiling of like, dude, he's like, I learned so much. He's like, dude, I need a spreadsheet of all the different species we found and what they look like, because he's like, dude, I don't want to run a brush hog out there anymore. He's like, I'm scared to cut nothing other than, running fire, just cutting some of those species. But
that's great.
Yeah, it was just fascinating. And again, he's a guy, and he still is like this, but he's like, he's talking about like the one food plot. It's on this bench on this ridge top that has some of the most diverse habitat out there.
Yep.
Alan and Kyle talked about, he's like, dude, if somebody wanted to have the species that you have right here, they're going to be paying upwards of $3,000 per acre to plant what you have here planted. And he's like, and you just put a food plot over the top of some of it. and afterwards, after the fact, Anthony told me, he's like, dude, I'm just not going to go through and spray. I'm just going to let it kind of do its thing and see how it produces. And he's like, we just won't put a food plot there next year. I'm like, all right, cool, man.
Hey, get it.
But it's fascinating. It's worth getting those guys out there on your property and seeing what they can find. But it was awesome experience. But flip side, we did have a scouting trip, some shenanigans that still kind of working out, but it was a good time. We found a lot of interesting stuff that was not really expecting to find where we found it. Yeah.
So last year we did a lot of mountain hunts, I would say, or we did one main mountain hunt, but we talked about mountain hunting a lot last year. It was kind of like a focal point, I guess, that me and you both got really interested in it, and we focused on it pretty hard. Well, this year we've got several Riverbottom hunts coming up that we're going to be doing. At least 3, right?
Yep.
Like 3 big Riverbottom hunts that we're going to be doing, filming them, everything. And, like in preparation for those hunts, we're going to be doing scouting. We're going to be interviewing people and everything. So you Flatlanders, your time is coming, I promise. And part of one of those hunts is that we were going to take care of last weekend was we were going to go scout. And, man, we were going to take the old boat out. We've had that boat for a couple months now. We're going to go take it on its maiden scouting voyage. We've taken it fishing a couple times, but we're going to go take it scouting. That's what we got it for. So, man, we wake up at, 4:30? 4? We wake up at 4, leave at 4:30.
Yeah.
I pick you up. We drive an undisclosed amount of time to an undisclosed location.
Oh, so now you want to be secret. Okay. All right.
So we go to this river that we're going to throw the boat in at. Dude, I'm so excited. I got my fishing rods too. I was like, we're going to catch a crappie. We're going to go throw cameras out. It's going to be fun. And that boat was in the water at a grand total of like 7 minutes, possibly. Got some issues. What kind of issues we having?
So Andrew's very new to boats. So I am
very new to boats.
So I grew up with boats, and there's certain things that like you just naturally check off the list, like when you start a boat up. First, if you have like four strokes, a little bit different from a 2-stroke. But number one, when you crank a motor up, you're going to do a couple things. First off, you're going to be listening, and you kind of just subconsciously doing it. It's not necessarily a checklist, but like, is it sounding weirder than normal? I mean, that like a 4-stroke, our 4-stroke is extremely quiet.
Purrs like a kitten.
I mean, it's like you barely hear it when it's on. And also, what I'm saying is like, if it's knocking or sounds like anything sounds off, you just cut it off. And then also are going to be looking for when you look back after you start the engine, making sure that, water's coming out of the engine. With the, we call it the old pisser.
Yep.
I don't even know what the technical term is.
I don't know.
That's just, what
that is the technical term.
Yeah, the pisser.
That's what we call it in Alabama.
So, and just make sure water's coming out. Well, Andrew got in the boat. I was able to back him up because we're still working on Andrew's trailer skills.
Hey, easy now. I can back up a trailer with the best of them now.
It's taking them some time. We finally coaching them.
I figured it out.
We're gonna do a how-to
Look,
video.
I ain't gonna lie, I didn't grow up with boats. All right, I don't know how to do this stuff.
But anyways, he pulls off the trailer. When he pulls off the trailer, another thing, a four-stroke should not be smoking at all. Okay, so the two-stroke, of course, you're burning oil, so that sucker's gonna be smoking. But a four-stroke shouldn't be smoking at all. He pulls off in turns, and I'm pulling the trailer back. When he does, I'm seeing not a lot of smoke, but I'm seeing some smoke coming out of the back of the engine, like where the pisser's at. And I'm like, that's weird. And I put the truck in park, and I look back, and I'm like, I don't see any water coming out of the engine. And, he's, 30, 40 yards from me at this point, and kind of pull out, and you're doing a little circle. And I try to yell at you quietly, a soft yell, as we would say, okay? And be like, hey, is there water coming out of the engine? And you're like, what? And I'm like, if you can't hear me, like, the engine's got to be pretty loud. Yeah. I could hear the engine from where we're at, which typically you
I could not hear you at all.
And finally, you cut
it off.
Yeah, you cut it off. And I was like, hey, is there water coming out of the engine? And you're like, I don't know. Let me start it up. And you start it up, and there's smoke coming out. There's no water coming out of the engine. I'm like, all right, kill it right now.
That's not good.
Because that's how it cools the engine down. If you don't cut it, and if we didn't notice it and was a run, we would have had that sucker locked up, and that would now be a paperweight.
Yep.
A big paperweight. So
big expensive paperweight.
So long story short, impeller we think went out. I don't know. You took it off, and I'm looking at the impeller. Looks fine. So
yeah. Did you look at it out there a minute ago?
Yeah, I looked at it. But
it doesn't look bad.
We're gonna have to figure that out. But yeah, so impeller went out, something went out, and it's not pumping water. So it quickly changed our plans because kind of where we were going, there's no walk-in access. Mm-hmm. So we had to pull an audible and go find some property that we could actually potentially walk into.
Yeah, that was pretty disappointing. Not gonna lie, it was crushing. Actually, one might say, I was pretty upset, dude. I was looking forward to that. There's some parcels down there that you can only get to by boat that I am real excited about going and looking at. Yeah. Just how it sets up. Some recent guests that we've talked to, Jeremy Aaron. Some of the stuff that he talks about. Looking for and keying in on, this place checked a lot of boxes. Couldn't get to it. So we went and checked out a different place that we could get to by foot. And it's a place that we had pinned anyways that I've been interested in since really last year. And I just didn't have a chance to go hunt it last season, late in the year. And we walked into that, and it took a fun boat ride / fishing / scouting trip to a 6.5 mile walk through a swamp. So that was fun. But it was pretty productive. I mean, once we actually hit the swamp and got out there and started looking around, we ended up finding quite a bit of deer sign, and we ended up finding quite a bit of scrapes specifically, which was pretty interesting. Yeah. Keying in on particularly sloughs, beaver dams, and pinch points, stuff like that. The area that I had been looking at is a place that gets a pretty good amount of hunting pressure. There's quite a few people that hunt this when the rut's going on, and they're all limited to walk in from a certain way. They all have to walk in from this one main road, and there's quite a bit of land, as we found out, that you can walk to back there. So you might have 4 or 5 different guys parking pretty close to each other, but they're walking down into a pretty large area. And so my thought is, if you could come in by boat and get on the back side of all that, when those guys, they're just doing a deer drive for you, essentially. And so that's what I wanted to look at. And you can get to it by boat, but the boat didn't work. So we walked into it the same way that those other people might walk into it, and basically just kind of hit the edge of the sloughs and started running them down. And we were checking out the heads of sloughs, beaver dams, stuff like that. Yeah. What were your kind of first impressions of it? You were a little underwhelmed at first.
Yeah, I was like, it's cool. It's funny because for whatever reason, and again, I don't have a bunch of years of experience hunting river bottoms, but the sign in river bottoms to me is very different than what I would find in hill country.
Yes.
And what I mean by that is, even like when I was in Arkansas, it's the same situation. A couple places I've hunted in Alabama, it's like the sign. When I say sign, I'm not talking about tracks. Like, you can find tracks everywhere. Like, I'm not talking about tracks. I'm talking about scrapes and rubs to me are very different on where you find them and what you're finding. Like in hill country, if you were at the top of a big thermal hub and you had a couple points drop down, you're at the highest spot, you're probably going to find some rubs, you're probably going to find some scrapes there. You're going to probably find them in and around that thermal hub, down in the thermal hub. Flatland, it's not like that because there's no thermal hubs per se, as in like what we would imagine. We have a bunch of elevation change. So it's almost like when you found areas that close to the water, where some of that thermals would pull down to those sloughs or pull down to, the water in general, you would find thicker cover right there on the edge of the water, and you'd find that sign right there on the edge of the water. But the second you got off that edge of where that water was, it would like disperse, and like you're not finding scrapes, you're not finding rubs or anything. But the second you got down to the water, you're like, okay, they're clearly traveling right here. And it might be for a few reasons. Number one, you probably have a lot stronger, you're going to have a lot stronger thermal right there, everything pulling down to that water. But also, I think with the wind probably eddying and probably like kind of going down the edge of that water or down the edge of the tree line could cause it to be a kind of like a wind tunnel where those deer could probably smell, a lot easier down there than if they were kind of off the water's edge. That's just a thought. I'll be interested in kind of seeing how it plays out. But the sign definitely said it. So the interesting is you're walking through stuff that all looks the same. And all of a sudden, you just hit this edge, and it still kind of looks the same. Yeah. But then you're like, oh, well, here they're at. And that's kind of what it was. Yep. I mean, we walked that first spot, and you're like, I want to go check out this Beaver Dam. I'm like, all right, cool. And went across the slough. We get there, and first I find a little persimmon tree growing that we posted a photo on, which was kind of cool. Yep. And not, I don't know, 15 yards from that little Beaver Dam was the first big scrape we found. Yeah, so... And also with this area, it's in a part of Alabama that it's South Alabama. We'll just say that, and it's in an area where your deer, your body weights are going to be smaller. Yeah. And I think we ran into a little bit of what we ran into on the SOA hunt last year, because the SOA hunt we did last year was like lower Alabama. Yep. Smaller body weights. My buck was 4.5, and he weighed 136 pounds. Live weight, guts in, everything. That's crazy. And then yours was 5.5. He weighed what, 145? Or something? 146 live weight, which is crazy. Yeah, exactly. So I mean, just like not big deer. So when you walk up and you find a bunch of tracks, the reason I bring this up is we found that Beaver Dam, and there was all these tracks coming off that Beaver Dam. I'm like, oh, heck yeah. And Jacob was not impressed. He's like, look at all these fawns crossing this Beaver Dam. Not excited at all. I was like, dude, I don't know. These deer down here probably weigh like 120 pounds. Yeah. So, like, you got to take that into consideration. Yeah, but once you re-key your mind to that, though, you're kind of like, okay, actually, this might be a pretty good track. It's not like a four-finger giant Iowa track or anything, but for here, this might be a pretty good track, Yeah, when you go from like you can go from like north part of Alabama or like a lot of these states, and you go south, unless you're in an area with a ton of ag, like maybe it's different, and like just you have some bigger body weights, but like it's not the case. Yeah, where we were at, and it's like that is, and the SOA hunt was very much like that, because I was very underwhelmed the whole trip. And I'm like, dude, I haven't seen a single buck track. Dude, I think it's a buck track. I'm like, dude, they're little tiny little things. I mean, like, dude, it's got to be over like 3 fingers width for me to like get kind of excited about it. And I don't think we found a single trek on the SOA hunt like that, but we saw a ton of bucks, and like come to find out, you grab their hoof and you're like, dude, they got tiny little feet. Well, we killed those deer, and we were looking at their hooves, and I was like, if I killed this at home, this would be like a doe, like an average doe at home. Like, it's crazy how much smaller they were. And but again, like where we're at. So long story short, when we got that Beaver Cross, and there was a ton of tracks, I'm like, dude, nothing gets me excited about this. Like, I'm like, these are some 80 pound. Like, if I wanted to shoot a 73-pound fawn or doe. Yeah, I'm like, little dink deer. But then you got to realize pocket deer. Yeah, then you got to realize where you're at. I'm like, okay, well, he might be mature, but he might have some tiny little feet. So I had to like bring myself back to it. But at first, I was like, this is not cool. I don't like this. That was the first spot that I actually had pinned that I wanted to go look at. Which Onyx tip. This is what I do now, because my pins are absolutely overwhelming. I have literally thousands of them because I've been using Onyx for so long. Is when I'm going to a new place, I'll drop a pin and I'll make it like green or something. Like this year, I'm doing all green pins for stuff that I want to go look at. Ooh. And then when I go get to that spot, I will delete that pin and drop a new pin, or you can just change like the color or whatever if it's in the spot you want it, and fill it out with like notes and everything of like what is actually in that spot. So that way
I'm not having pins on top of pins. So that was the first spot that I actually pinned, was at Beaver Dam, and I could see it on the imagery. And the way the spot's set up is it's a slough coming off the main river channel. It runs like way up into the land, and up at the head of it, it doesn't just end. It gets real swampy, and it just kind of peters out over I don't know, probably 350 yards or so, where it just gets like kind of grassy and watery and just kind of, marshy looking. And the deer can cross it really anywhere. Like, they can cross anywhere in that marsh, but I just keyed in on that Beaver Dam because it's just like a linear feature that goes through there that they can follow. So we hit the Beaver Dam, find all the tracks. I'm like, okay, this is great. I bet we're going to find a scrape just a little bit further down. So now we're walking down the slough towards the main river. So you got to think when the thermals are falling, they're going to be probably pulling out towards that main river. So thermals are going to be falling down from that Beaver Dam. So we're walking downwind of it, and it's probably about 25 to 50-ish yards. I don't know. I'd have to look at the map again. But there's that scrape right where it's supposed to be. And I'm talking about, I got fired up, dude. Because it was a big scrape. Oh, yeah. It was a big scrape.
It was. What was the tree it was on? Was it a beech?
It was a beech tree. And this was, it had, I think, 4 pretty distinct looking branches. They were torn up. Very big area, bigger than the table we're sitting in front of right now. Much bigger than this table, actually. One of the sections of the scrape was about the size of this table. And we got pretty excited about it. Wanted to throw a camera on it. Jacob was like, I don't know if I'll throw a camera on this. So we keep moving. And it was, here's the interesting thing about the scrapes in this area to me, was in the same way that you have to kind of like retool your mind with the tracks, I feel like you have to do that with the scrapes too. Because as impressive as that scrape was, we go 50 more yards and we find another one. And we go 20 yards and find another one.
Yep.
30 yards, find another one.
Big looking branches.
Big looking branches, big scrapes. And each and every one of these scrapes that we're finding, minus 1 or 2, are scrapes that if I found those on our mountain hunt area, I would be like doing a backflip.
Yeah,
because
I agree.
They're that impressive.
Yep.
Now, up on the mountain area, it's a lower deer density. There's just not as many deer. Down here, there's a much higher deer density. And, that's probably why they're all so small, to be honest with you. And so I'm just wondering if that's just a factor of how many deer there are. They're just making more scrapes.
Yeah.
Because I've actually heard someone float the idea that, it might have been Greg Skufka, that the amount of licking branches that you have is like loosely based on the amount of bucks that are visiting that scrape, because they don't necessarily like to hit the same licking branch as all the other bucks. So that's why, especially with a beech tree, that's why you find impressive scrapes on beech trees, because there's like 5 perfect licking branches, and buck number 1 comes and works this one, and buck number 2 comes up and he smells that and he works the next one. Buck number 3, comes and works the next one, because they're all trying to make their own little mark, And then, of course, they'll work all of them. They'll work a scrape that's already there, but I've heard that as an explanation of why they do that. And that would just kind of make sense in my head in that area of why there's so many big scrapes in such a concentrated area, and they're all linear. They're running right down the edge of that slough. Mm-hmm. And another little thing about the spot that I found interesting was the surrounding hardwoods were very open. You could see probably about 100 yards through them, and it's June, so we're full green up. So in wintertime, you can see way through there for sure when all the leaves and everything drop. And these deer were working just the very edge of the water. You kind of mentioned it earlier, where there's enough sunlight penetrating off the edge of the lake, basically, that you have 10 to 12 yards of slightly thicker cover right along the water's edge, and that's where all that deer sign was concentrated. The minute you break away and get off of that slightly thicker cover, there's like nothing out there besides like hog sign. So I found that super interesting. I really liked the setup, and it was fun to film it too. We filmed a lot of B-roll there, because it's going to be fun to show just how much of a subtle terrain difference that was, but the deer were still just like glued to that edge.
Yeah.
And this is a place that I have a lot of history with over many years, and I used to struggle really hard at this place because I'm hunting those big open hardwoods, and I'll find like one-off deer sign, but I'm not finding anything great, and I'm never seeing much over the years. And then we find something like this. I'm like, okay, I wonder if this is it. I wonder if this is what I've been missing the whole time. And then you zoom out, and all of the slough edge, the habitat edges, all the scrapes and everything fall kind of in the middle of a bunch of different pine thickets that are just kind of scattered all over the place. And the deer are just kind of working around through there. And I think that Beaver Dam is a little bit of a focal point for them to kind of, meet at, where it seems like that's kind of the spokes of the hub, where they're crossing that slough and going from this pine thicket to that one, and they're bouncing back and forth from all of them. So
yeah. Also, another interesting factor we found when we got down there a good ways is there must have been some kind of major thunderstorm system that came through. I don't think it was tornado, but thunderstorm system that came through with some straight line winds sometime over the summer or early or late spring. It blew down a ton of trees. Just off some of it was on the water's edge, but a lot of it was just off the water's edge. And the crazy thing is, it wasn't like a tornado. Like a tornado comes through, anything in the path of the tornado is going down. This was like you'd have a few trees here, a few trees here down, and then you go 30 yards over, and there'd be another line of trees down. Yep. And like they were all blown down. They weren't cut down. You can see they got blown down, and they were all still green, surprisingly enough. So again, it happened very recently to when we got there. But the crazy thing is, again, it wasn't just a huge mess. Like you could kind of like walk in between some of these down trees where you'd have
like a maze.
Yeah, like you'd have like a 20-yard wide gap that would go through like where you have trees down your left, trees on your right, and then it would tee off, and then it would split. And that like path you're walking is 20 yards wide would split, and then you'd have a row of trees down in front of you, and then you could go left or right. Down the split that again was 30, 40 yards wide, and it was like that throughout the whole thing, which got me crazy excited because previously, I'm sure there was not much of any cover down there. Like it seems like in the Riverbottoms, the only time you find like a lot of cover in that more hardwood stand is if you have a bunch of blown down trees and sunlight hits the ground, gets thicker, and then you have the blown down trees too. Well, this to me sets up amazing for the rut because you had like this like a maze of trees and all these big paths you could go through. And again, they're not like 5-yard wide paths. They're 10, 15, 20 yards wide. Some are a little bit wider than that.
Yep.
Kind of going between all these blown down trees, and the deer were already using it. But we didn't find any scrapes there. We didn't find any rubs there because we're like, okay, that's kind of like disheartening because you're finding tracks, but it's very hit or miss on the sign, like that they're leaving from the past rut. But I'm like, I bet you now this year, because that wasn't there last year. This year, it's going to be crazy there because first off, if a doe's trying to get away from a buck, she's going in that stuff.
Yeah.
Like she's going to be diving through, down trees, getting away from the buck. But also, it's set up so good to find, and we had a spot like that marked where you'd have like one of these splits. Again, like an example I gave you, where you can put a mock scrape right in the middle of where you have like 3 or 4 of these different intersections kind of coming together with all these down trees, and put a mock scrape right there, and I bet you it'd do so good. And there's still a bunch of white oaks standing in there. Early season might be awesome if they're dropping, but for the rut, I feel like that would be incredible.
Yes,
like, incredible. Like in that maze of all those down trees, and like have bucks cruising through that stuff.
Yeah, definitely. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. And yeah, that was one thing also that I found interesting was the lack of rubs. I don't know if you noticed that.
Oh, absolutely.
We found so many scrapes, and we found like 5 rubs or something on the whole walk, 6.5 miles.
Yep.
I mean, we found very few rubs, and I have no explanation for that, like at all. No. But you kind of ran into that in Arkansas last year.
Oh, yeah.
Where you hunted it early season, and you weren't finding any rubs. You weren't finding whip rubs from this year, but you also weren't finding rubs from last year.
No, that was mid-October, and didn't find any rub. I mean, I found one rub, and I'm like, dude, it was very, it was something that wasn't impressive. It was like a whip rub, but it didn't look like it was a fresh whip rub. It was probably like just coming out of velvet like 2 months previously. But like other than that, didn't find any rubs until the rut. Like now when the rut happened, I don't know if they rubbed those same trees every single year because I had walked through some of those areas and did not see any old rubs in those areas. So I'm like, I don't know if the deer just moved in or those trees healed up so good that you couldn't even tell there was a rub there. I doubt that.
Yeah.
But maybe I just missed them. But like I did not find any rubs when I was there in mid-October, and then in November it was just insane. Like it was just giant rubs everywhere.
Yep. I wonder if it's going to be like that when we go hunt this place.
I wonder. That would be exciting.
We're going to find out. You go into there to your little tree maze that we found. Find a big old rub line running right through there.
I mean, yeah. I mean that's the spot I would love to go back to, and again throw a camera out and put a mock scrape there. I think you would do extremely well. Just because again, it's like it's a bottleneck where you're bottling deer down from a couple different directions coming to this like one spot. And I'm sure there's other spots like that where it's like you have 4 or 5 intersections all coming together with all these down trees. But it looks like a spot like you could have deer bedding there, kind of in and around those brush piles. You know, there's gonna be oaks there, so they could bed close, like next to some thick cover, in some thick cover, right adjacent to trees that are gonna be dropping, which is something you don't find down there. I think early season you probably find a lot of deer bedded out in the open, even some of the bucks where they can kind of see, but they can feed right there.
Yep.
But again, during the rut, I just think it's gonna be incredible. So
yeah.
And it's one of those spots like, dude, I mean, you can hunt with a rifle, but I mean, if you shoot one, it's gonna be
Get close.
like it's gonna be 40 yards probably.
Might as well bow hunt it.
I mean, maybe I say that, but we'll
now
see.
you're gonna be taking that muzzleloader in there.
Yeah, taking the muzzleloader.
Yeah, buddy. Sets up good for that.
Yep.
Yeah, it was a fun time, man. I'm excited to get more into the flatland stuff. Go look at those areas, kind of get back into some of that because I haven't done it in a couple years now. I used to go to that place every single year and loved it, and I just haven't made as much effort down there as I have in the past. So I'm excited to get back into it and really try to figure that out. It's going to be a new challenge, kind of like the mountain thing was with us last year. I mean, we've always been kind of hill country guys, and the bigger mountain was a step out for us. It was something new, so I'm excited to do that again this year with the swamp stuff, and that place was just the very beginning, you know. With that scouting trip in the books, what do you think? What are your kind of thoughts overall on how that went? You know, how we're preparing for this fall and the flatland stuff.
Number one is realizing, first off, the deer bodies are going to be smaller, and tracks probably going to be, again, similar, again, smaller. So don't let that be a discouraging factor for us, because, again, it was for me until, like, you kind of made the comment, like, same thing on our SOA hunt. I'm like, okay, that's a good point. That's a really good point. Also, I do think, like, the boat access will be super helpful. I am interested in seeing how many other guys are doing that as well. Just because I know, like, that part of kind of like, you know, southern part of the state, you probably have a lot more duck hunters. You have a lot more people that probably have boats. So interesting kind of seeing how that plays out. But I'm excited. I'm interested in, again, trying to learn more about the Riverbottom hunting style, kind of like from guys like Jeremy Aaron, who we recently had on the podcast, and seeing, you know, how we can kind of learn that, and also just make us even more well-rounded whitetail hunters.
Yeah.
You know, hunting the mountains a little bit, which we're going to try to do some more of that as well, but, you know, hunting higher elevation, hill country, and flatlands, and kind of just from like a talking point and interviewing skill set, we have, you know, something we can really kind of work with when it comes to guess based off personal experiences of what we've dealt with and how they would work through different situations. So.
Yeah. Well, what'd you think of, like, the actual trip, though? Like, what'd you think of the sign we found on the ground? Like, were we finding the sign in places where you expected us to find sign, or were you a little bit surprised by how everything laid out?
A little surprised at just kind of where it was all at. I mean, it was all around the edge of the water. But it was good. I'm really perplexed why we did not find more rubs. Because the rubs we found, like, they were fine. Like, there was one that looked pretty good, but it was just real low to the ground. Like, again, like, good rubs, but if they're low to the ground, I'm like, what the heck is this deer doing, dude?
Yeah,
Is he scratching his feet? I mean, we found one that was a pretty good sized rub, but, like, it wasn't higher than maybe 10 or 12 inches off the ground was the top of the rub. Like, he was rubbing, like, okay, maybe like 15. It was just really close to the ground.
Little pygmy deer.
And I'm like, what is going on, dude? Like, it's just strange. I mean, the sign was good. I was a little underwhelmed, again, just going back to the whole track thing. Like, we found tracks in very specific spots, and then there are certain areas that looked really good based off, like, what it looked like on aerial imagery, even on the ground, and, like, there was no tracks to be seen. So I'm interested in kind of seeing how they shift. But, I mean, it was a good trip, especially, you know, trying to make stuff work since the boat wasn't working.
Yeah.
You know, it worked out well, I think.
Yeah, I'm excited to get back out there. We did put a camera on that Beaver Dam crossing, so I'm eager to see what we actually get right there. Because, I mean, it could... There was no fawn tracks there, which I don't think they'd be dropping by that point anyways. But still, I mean, those sets of tracks that we saw very well could be a bachelor group of bucks. So,
and we found one set of tracks, even though it was kind of in some wet ground, so, you know, they splay out a little bit more. But we found one track that I was like, okay, that looks more like what I'm used to.
I don't know, man. I don't trust Jacob's track judging skills, because when he started showing me what he was calling a four-finger track, it is like very obviously a running track from a deer. I'm like, dude, that could be like a doe running. Like, you can't tell.
We're not showing you a four-finger track.
Oh, dude, you like, I almost said the name of the place, but I'm not gonna say it. But you've showed me
Alabama?
pictures. Yeah, oh yeah, you've showed me
Okay.
tracks. You've showed me pictures of tracks and in person.
Mm-hmm.
But you need to work on knowing when you're looking at like a running, trotting track versus a walking track, because I think that a lot of times you're mistaking a running track for a walking track. Because I mean, when they're just splayed real hard like that, most of the time that's a running track. You know, it might be different for Midwestern guys or just people who maybe live in areas with softer soil and much heavier deer. But down here, like, that just does not happen very often at all, especially on our like clay soil type stuff. Like, you're just not going to have a big splayed out track like that most of the time.
Interesting.
So, anyways,
I need to get with a biologist and see what the stride differences between a walking track and a running track.
Well, the best way to do it is when you're driving around on the WMA and you see 3 does, you know, walking down the side of the road, and then they see your truck and then they start running, hop out and go look in the ditch at their tracks. And that's how I did it, because I learned that from trapping, like driving out to the same place every single day, you know, for 2 or 3 weeks while your traps are out. And you're doing it with coyote track stuff too, but when you're out there that much, you see deer all the time. I did the same thing with turkeys too, because I was always curious about the turkey track thing. Like, oh, if this toe's longer, then it's a gobbler track. Well, man, I do subscribe to that still somewhat, but I had one time I walked up on a big group of hens, and they were just walking around in this real dusty looking area, and I was like, oh, this is gonna be perfect. And I scared them all off, walked up there and took a picture of their tracks, and I put it on one of those turkey Facebook groups. I was like, hen or gobbler? Man, there's all these guys on there like, oh, that's a big old gobbler. That's a gobbler track. And I'm like, nope, I saw the turkey that stood in this track. It was definitely a hen. But that's the best way to do it, is when you actually see a deer and you know for a fact that deer just made that track, go over there and check it out, you know, take a look at it. But anyways, with that being said, we got some Q&A submissions that we're going to be going over. So we added a Q&A segment to our website. It's a whole page where you can go and you can drop whatever questions you have on the show. So this could go for just random questions that you might have that you want us to do on a outro, or if you have questions for a guest that we had on in the past or one that we're talking about having on in the future. I mean, really anything. Just go drop your questions in here and you might get to hear it on the show. So we got a couple here to go through. I'm going to start with one from Mr. Bran Hutchinson, because it's very relevant to today's topic. Can y'all revisit how to find funnels in flat topographical areas? Dang it, man. Also, how to scout/hunt low-lying, swampy, river-bottomish areas with a lot of flat ponds and creeks. Jacob, what do you think about that question?
I mean, that's, again, something worth diving into with some other guests, specifically, because, again, this is something that we're still trying to figure out, is like the whole river bottom hunting. You know, the funnels, like, just based off some of the funnels that I've seen over the last couple of years of like how deer were using it, like in some of these areas, like that funnel could literally be like the river's edge, depending on, let's see, well, this is more, river bottom stuff. Like, depending on like the area of the country at and what the timber looks like on the river, like where we've been in a couple different spots in Alabama and Arkansas. And I'm trying to think, have I, Georgia a little bit too, not so much. I'm trying to think anywhere else. But that's kind of different. It seems like all that thick cover, a lot of times, if it's like big open hardwoods next to the river, is right on the river's edge. Especially if it's like, if the river's going at any direction, if it's like, if the river's going east to west, the north side of the river is going to be a lot thicker on the river's edge.
Yep.
Because it's south facing, it's going to get sun so much more time of the year, and that sun can penetrate underneath that canopy further into like off the river than it would be on the south side of the river, where again the south side of the river, that riverbank's facing north. When that sun comes over the top of it, it's not going to be able to penetrate nearly as far into that timber versus the north side. So I have seen that on areas when we're hunting, say like the north side of a river, and the river's running east to west, like that one of those funnels being like the thick habitat edge up against the river. Like those bucks are like running that river. And one of the guys we're going to be interviewing on the podcast, hopefully later on this summer, he does that a ton. Like some of that thickest cover, that funnel that the deer really want to stay in, especially the bucks traveling, is right on that water's edge, where you might have a buffer. It might only be 10 feet wide, or it might be 10 yards wide, or maybe even wider than that, or just like thicker cover. And that's what those bucks are using. And that's been, killer for, some of the guys we're looking to get on the podcast. And then also like, other areas, depending on like whether or not, I'm trying to say, he didn't really give any kind of details on this low-lying and swampy river bottoms with flats and creeks. I mean, dude, if you found, I actually just talked to Wes Moe about this, who we've interviewed a few times on the podcast, and also Jeremy Aaron talked about this too. It's like you have that creek that comes off that river, and especially like at the mouth of the creek at the river, it's going to be at the widest point. And at some point, if you follow that creek up off the river, there's going to be a point that's going to be easy for them to cross, and that you'll have a natural crossing right there where the creek gets shallower, it gets narrower. They can jump the creek or they can cross the creek super easy, and that's another like really good funnel. And Jeremy Aaron actually talked about that a little bit. That, and then also if you have like the really skinny, like you have different fields and stuff on the edge of the river, and it goes from like big wood block to another big wood block, and there's a skinny gap along the river that's only 100 yards wide of just timber. Like that's going to be a funnel. Now you got to find a funnel inside that funnel in order to make it huntable with like down trees or the edge of a slough or something like that.
Talking bow hunting.
Yeah,
if you got a rifle, you're good to go.
If you can see, but you still might not be able to see through the whole thing. It depends on how thick it is.
Yeah.
Because it seems like some of those skinnier, at least what I found, like in Arkansas, those skinnier patches of timber, the sun can penetrate really easily. At least some stuff I've seen, and it was like crazy thick. I'm like, they can deer get 80 yards from you. You never know he's there. You might hear him, but that's it. So.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, I agree with all that. Based on what some past guests have said, like where we just went recently scouting, like what we've been talking about on this outro, I was thinking in my mind, of what Jeremy was talking about. I was also thinking of Mariah Bogus when we talked to him. I don't even know what episode. That was a while back. But Mariah, when he lived in Mississippi, he just, laid the smack down on some bucks. He did so good. Like when he was in college down there.
Very good point. Yeah.
He put a hurting on him for sure. Like great bucks on public ground in Mississippi.
Especially for a guy that's not from there.
Yeah.
And he just learned it while he was in school there?
Dude, he's legit.
Yeah.
He always talked about slough heads and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And that's what initially drew me to the spots that we ended up going to was that and the beaver dams.
Yeah.
Stuff that's going to allow them to cross water. They can cross it wherever they want. They can swim really good, but that little feature that makes it easier, kind of like you were just saying, and that's what we went and looked at this time for this one scouting trip. And I think it worked out. Like I found like that spot. If I don't get to go scout another time between now and January, I would go and hunt that spot and actually be very confident hunting it.
Yeah.
Just especially if I could come in off a boat, because then not only do I have the habitat and terrain working for me in that spot, but I've got the pressure coming off the roads working for me too.
Yeah.
So there's just a lot going for that spot. So that's why I focused on that. But yeah, we're going to talk to more people about it in the future and learn it.
The sloughs are interesting. So like we've talked to guys, Kyler Moppert, our buddy of ours from Mississippi, I guess transferred from Mississippi from Louisiana. They talk about down there is like some of those sloughs are so shallow. Those deer, they'll cross the slough. Like they'll walk right across the slough. The slough might be 3-4 feet deep, and they'll just go right across it, swim it or whatever.
Yep.
But it's like sometimes, again, you find it like that, and especially like it seems like the more delta regions of the southeast, those deer are so used to water, they just don't care.
Yeah.
Like, water is nothing to them. And then you go to other parts of like different parts of the southeast, and I'm sure it's like this in other parts of the country where like there's water, but it's not like everything's flooded out, and those deer maybe are less accustomed to it.
Yeah,
those deer are the ones it seems like are more they're more willing to walk around that water instead of crossing it. Mm-hmm. And like the head of those sloughs are awesome. Like you have that slough that comes right off the river, and where that slough stops at the very top of it, those deer are going to go around the edge of it, and you can hunt it with a bunch of different kind of winds. It's kind of cool. Like I hunted one last year, and had a little buck come right by me, and I was hunting the head of a slough, and it was pretty sweet. Yeah. It works really good if you can come in by water. If you have to walk the edge of it, you better walk right on the freaking water's edge and hope there's no alligators if you're in the deep south. But the sloughs are awesome. And also another thing, like Andrew was talking about with sloughs or with beaver dams, is sometimes some of those sloughs right off the river, because we've seen this in some spots, right off the river where that slough is coming off the river, sometimes a beaver will dam that right there.
Yes.
So like if it's real narrow, there'll be a beaver dam there, and like you might not even see it on aerial imagery. You're like, okay, cool, like it just looks like a slough there, and then you get there and there's a beaver dam that literally merges the ground on either side of that slough right at the edge of the river. And that's a spot, again, one of the guests we're going to interview has killed a ton of deer right on those beaver dams, where he'll find a tree right off the edge of that beaver dam over the river where he can sit there and watch that beaver dam, not 15 yards in front of him, and kill really, really nice bucks crossing the beaver dam.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk to him. That's going to be a fun one. This one is from Luke Stats. I think that's how you say your last name, Luke. I apologize if I didn't pronounce that right. Best informational podcast out there. Y'all are killing it. Don't stop the grind. I'd love to see you guys visit a certain national forest
in
Illinois. I'm on massive bucks, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, okay. Hey, man, it's on the list one of these years, I promise you. My question, y'all kill and talk about so many bucks. Can each of you share a photo of your best buck you've harvested, gun or bow, and tell us the backstory on it? Well, we got some videos for you, my friend, that are be coming out here pretty soon. I guess we can't do that right here, but
I mean, mine best is probably that Bella deer I killed in Tennessee.
Yeah.
I mean, they were talking like just biggest buck. And then I don't know if I want to tell the backstory of that deer.
Well, it's on a podcast. What podcast episode?
That's a long time ago.
It was a while back.
That's 20. Was it 2020? It was 2020.
It was a Tennessee velvet hunt. Yeah, it was 2020. Yeah. Almost died in a tornado trying to get up there to go.
It killed him right after a hurricane.
Hurricane came through.
Like literally, I was wearing waders and a rain jacket with my rifle because that's the thing about that hunt. It's you can hunt firearms. And just had an awesome opportunity on a big bachelor group when they finally came out. But nothing really towards that. It's just, I guess the lesson learned there was, suck it up and get freaking wet which I mean, I was hunting in waders and a rain jacket in August because of hurricane. I was sitting in the last band of the hurricane waiting for it to stop because I knew when it stopped, those deer would come back out. And that's exactly what happened.
Yeah. Mine would be the SOA buck from last year. And rather than rehash the whole story, because we got to get through some more of these questions, if you scroll back in our episode feed to January, like mid-January, it's called, I think, 2 Alabama Bucks Down is the name of the episode. So go look for it, and the whole story's on there, and the video for that is going to be coming out later this summer, so you'll actually be able to watch that one happen. So.
Any good life lessons or lessons learned on that hunt?
Don't throw a hissy fit and throw your stuff out of the tree, when you're on a hot doe, when you miss a big buck. So anyways, all right, this one is from Brandon Barlow. This one's interesting. Do you think that individual bucks relate to individual does, and does he have to chase that doe, or does she go to him? Finally, does killing that doe make that buck more transient? Curious about other people's findings. Thanks in advance. And that's Instagram is Carolina_Reaper315. Appreciate that. Appreciate the question. That is a fascinating question, man. That is something we need to talk to a biologist about for sure. If I had to just have I don't know. So if I was just gonna go with my gut on it, I'd say they probably do relate to individual does. They probably do know some does in their area that they're familiar with, and it's kind of like we've talked about with several guests in the past, where a buck, there'll be a certain doe that comes in at the same time every year, and maybe there's a buck that chases, there's 2 deer that interact with each other because they live close by, and so that pattern will play out year after year just because they live in proximity to each other.
So Wes Moe told me about this. It's interesting he brought this up. I'm trying to think, who was Wes talking to? It might have been Tony Myers or another guy. He was telling me about this at the Weaver event, talking about, in cattle, he's seen with cattle, that head bull.
Oh yeah,
I
remember him talking about
he's
this.
The young bulls would chase the cows around. He's he's not what he waits till they come in the heat and they come to him.
Yep.
And he said he's seen the exact same thing happen with big whitetails in some areas and also it might have been the Jolly Brothers talked about that, seeing a buck bedded on a ridge. It actually was the Jolly Brothers. But anyways, long story short, some of these guys have experience where it seems like a buck bedding in a certain spot and does strategically going to that mature buck, and that buck just bringing her, and he's not chasing her. Like, he's just in his spot.
Yeah.
And it seems like they're doing it more so in areas with higher deer numbers, where the buck truly doesn't have to chase anything. Like, there's so many does in the area, and it seems like it's always like the older age class buck. Now, I'm not saying that happens everywhere. I haven't personally seen that, but then again, I haven't been hunting for as many decades as some of these other guys. So
yeah.
But it is a very interesting point. And again, I wonder if there's any data behind that. And it would be probably more anecdotal when it comes to like the studies, if anything's ever been looked at that. I know Wes Moe, we've mentioned this a couple times. Wes Moe is killed, I think it was 2 or 3 bucks over the back of a very specific doe that had a certain like throat patch, ear color, like kind of, I don't know if she was piebald, something that he knew was the same deer, in the same tree, in the same spot. I think it was in 3 seasons, killed 2 or 3 bucks over her before she died, or disappeared. So
do you think killing that doe makes that buck more transient? I would say that probably depends on the area, because it depends on how many does there are, because it's not like that's the only doe.
Yeah, there's no way to answer that. I have no idea.
Yeah.
I mean, again, if it's high deer numbers, I don't think it really matters. I think he's just gonna be like, there's other does out there, but I think it's when you find like a really old mature doe, which everybody's experienced. Everybody's seen that doe that looks
old long nose Sally.
Like, she looks like a buck, but because she's 6-7 years old, got a huge chest on her, big long nose, whole 9 yards, and I'm sure those are the does that after going through 4 or 5 or 6 breeding cycles in years, that she probably maybe has a specific buck. I don't know the psychology of deer. It's interesting. It's a fascinating question, though.
I don't know. It's interesting. This one is from Jacob Samuelson. How do you know how many trees to cut when you're trying to regrow native grasses in a heavily wooded area? Before we even try to answer this, I'm just going to say go to Land and Legacy, go to their podcast, their YouTube, their website. They're going to be your resource for that, 100%. Also, Native Habitat Project. You can probably message him and or Land and Legacy, and then they'll be able to actually get you a really good. I'll say, probably enough trees where, like, if you were to cut one of the remaining trees, it wouldn't hit another tree.
It's a savanna cut.
It's a savanna cut. So there's no, your trees, if one were to fall, it's not going to hit another tree, if that makes sense. So most of the trees should be gone.
Yeah, I don't want to answer. I have no experience. I'll say this: our farm, or Anthony's farm that we just did the podcast on, the video is going to come out on it. You will see like a pretty damn good representation of what you're asking for. And then also, I would love, I got to talk to Alan about it. I'm going to say on the podcast, I want to see if we can go to his Tennessee property and see what he's done there and film some of that, because he's done that. Again, heavily hardwood timbered area, did a very heavy select cut on it, and it's been unbelievable for him and how it's produced, really large whitetails.
100%.
And more turkeys, way more turkeys, he said, is on that property.
Turkeys for days.
So, interesting.
Yeah. All right, this is from Gunnar Whitman. Hey guys, big fan of the show. Listen to probably 75% of the episodes and still working towards 100%. We appreciate that. Been listening for a couple years now, and ever since I decided to move to Georgia from Colorado, I've had some good success and great hunts in Northeast Georgia the last 2 seasons, and your show has definitely helped. I bounced around to a lot of different WMAs throughout the season, hunted more than a dozen so far. I enjoy this tactic for my home state, but I want to start hunting Alabama, and my strategy there is going to be to pick one WMA within about a 3-hour drive and learn that WMA the best I can.
Absolutely.
I want to find a place I can make 1 or 2 short trips to every year when I get a 3-day weekend. Only other criteria is that it's got to have a campground. I'm a Georgia hunter. I've looked into blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to read those on here. Also say I'm a deer hunter. I'm not a big buck hunter. I'm definitely not asking for pins or anything. Just want to know, in your opinion, based on experience, what you've heard. Do you think I can't say that on the podcast? Should I look somewhere else? I'll say this. So he's asking about a couple specific WMAs here in Alabama, and which one he should focus on.
And everyone he's mentioned so far, like, they're not bad options.
They're not bad options. You're going to be dealing with here's what I'll say. If you're coming from Georgia and you're looking to get for that January rut, you're looking to get some bang for your buck, I guess, pun intended. I would actually suggest that maybe you drive a little bit further into Alabama. One of the places you mentioned is pretty far into Alabama. The further you can get from the state line, the better, because all of the WMA, and this goes for any state really, all the WMAs that are real close to state lines, you're going to get a lot of non-resident hunters coming across. And man, there's one place on here that we hunted a couple years ago. If y'all go back and hear the episode that the hunt that broke my will, it was on that WMA. And dude,
and Gunner's got mentioned here. It's an awesome place, but dude, you talk about like one of the only management areas in Alabama that probably, I don't know if they hit 1,000 hunters on gun hunts, but it's really close. It's super close. I mean, it's the most hunting pressure I've ever seen, but it's known, for not only good quality deer, but just a ton of deer.
Yeah, it's got a lot of deer. But that's what I'm saying is like it's a close to the state line.
Yeah, if you're coming to Alabama, I would really look at like if you're in Georgia, like a great example in Georgia, depending on where you're at in Georgia, because Georgia's kind of like Alabama. They get crazy ruts. They got like southeast Georgia ruts super early, like really early in the fall, all the way up to, having hunts that in ruts that probably go into late November in certain areas. If you could get away from Georgia in the month of December and maybe not wait to January, I think you'll find, some areas that have high quality. You'll find areas in Alabama that have high quality deer, good deer numbers, but also aren't going to get the pressure like they get when Georgia closes out in January.
Yeah.
Like some of the areas that you had mentioned that are, again, you get different management areas on the state line that are good, but if you can find some other parts of Alabama, again, kind of get away from the state line like Andrew was saying and focus on the month of December, again, when it kind of slows down for y'all back home, you can find some really good activity in Alabama. And again, I always say like Alabama, if you're like trying to expand hunting opportunities in other states and like you truly have like a November or early December rut, Alabama's an awesome opportunity to be able to come to. And there's not nearly as much public land as like you have in other states. Like I see the guys from Arkansas hate that we talk about Arkansas, even though we don't talk about it that much, but again, I used to live there. So it's kind of, my second home state, but like Arkansas and Georgia have a ton of acres, like millions of acres of public. Alabama, I think it's 800,000 acres.
Yeah, 900.
So it's a fraction of other states, but you have a decent amount of public land throughout the state, so you can really find areas that you like. But going back to what you were talking about, Gunner, I would highly recommend like doing some research. You can find stuff on social media. You can listen to the podcast. You can go online. I would find an area that has the habitat that you're comfortable hunting in, and something that, like you said, you can kind of expand into. Because if you can, if you're only going to come for a few days, a 3-day weekend, and you're only going to come a couple times, I wouldn't try to go to different locations. I would try to find one management area, like you're saying, and really try to learn it, and then expand out from there once you kind of figure that out.
And I wouldn't limit yourself to like 3 hours. Like if there's a place that you're really interested in, but it's like 4.5, I'd just suck it up and I'd drive a little bit further. If you're already going to come over here and stay the night and stay for a full weekend, I'd just say I'd look at everything. I'd take everything into consideration.
Yeah.
Like we can't say a lot on here because you're naming like specific things.
Well, it's like I'll give you an example. I've done the same thing in Tennessee. Back when I was not doing the podcast full time, there's management areas in Tennessee that I always like to hunt, and they're pretty freaking far. I mean, one of them's like 5.5, almost 6 hours, and I would still do it in a 3-day weekend. I'd leave out on Friday. It would suck. I would drive until 11 o'clock, get there, sleep in the truck most times. And then I'd hunt all day Saturday. I'd hunt Sunday. And sometimes if it was really good, I'd hunt Sunday afternoon because it'd be kind of late in the season. It'd get dark at 5 o'clock. And I just know I'm not going to get home till midnight, but I'm going to drive, 5-6 hours home and then, be back. It sucked because Monday morning came around. You're like, oh, this sucks, but it is what it is. Just take enough, get some caffeine.
Yeah, man. Get you some energy drinks.
Yeah, but definitely, I wouldn't just limit yourself to just 3 hours. Now, if you have kids and everything, it might complicate some stuff. I can't speak on that, but definitely, I would not just worry about like just 3 hours being the limit by far.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd go for it, and I have a kid. I would still do that for sure. Like again, if you're taking the time to like break away for 3 or 4 days, like dude, give it all you got. All right, this one's from Avery Smith. Will the time not changing have an impact on this year's season? Did they do the daylight savings thing?
What I wonder what city he's talking about. You just
Alabama. Well, so Alabama passed it, but there was a federal bill to like get rid of it.
Okay.
Because the way Alabama works is they voted to stay on daylight savings time, but the federal government has to
mandate
it. They have to do away with daylight or something like that. It has to happen at the federal level for the Alabama law to kick in. Mm-hmm. So, it was in Congress.
I'm gonna look it up real quick.
I don't know what happened to it. I don't know if it ever got passed. Like, I heard it was getting blocked. I would love nothing more than for that to happen. I would love nothing more than for the stupid time to not change in deer season. Because here in Alabama, we live right on the edge of Central and Eastern time, and that means that when we fall back in the fall, all of a sudden it is getting dark at 4:30 in the afternoon here. All right, so after checking on whatever website you just looked at, looks like that bill stalled out, and I don't know if it's dead or if it's just kind of hanging out, waiting to have something done.
It's stuck in the house. Call your local
Call
house.
your
Call your representative, your house representative.
Yep. All right.
Whatever district you're in.
Tell them to get the lead out.
Harass the hell out.
Yeah, come on. All right, last one. Corey Bowen says, do you all still look at people's properties on Onyx and give them advice as to ideas to hunt and things like that? If so, where do I find information about that? Thanks. I enjoy the podcast and YouTube. Not a great hunter by any stretch, but definitely trying to learn. Me too, Corey. Appreciate you writing in with that. We're all just trying to learn here. We do still offer that through our Patreon account. So you can go to Patreon. We have a tier on there called the Collaborator tier. And if you go click on that, you'll see more information about it. But basically what we do is you send us a property. We take a look at it on the maps. And we actually make you a full video of us going through all of the pins that we drop on the place. So Jacob and I both map scout it. We'll drop all the pins on it, and we'll tell you in the video why we dropped that pin in that location, whether it's something that we have from our own experience, like, hey, this is similar to something that happened to me one time, or this is something that a guest talked about. So this directly relates to something like that Jeremy Aaron was talking about. If you're in Flatland and we point something out, we'll say, hey, this is kind of exactly what Jeremy Aaron was talking about in episode so-and-so. So we'll tie it into that stuff. At the end, we'll send that video to you. It only goes to you. It doesn't go out, to everybody else. And then we'll get on a phone call with you and actually talk it all over. Did I miss anything there?
No. And they can go find that on our Patreon. So you can go to patreon.com/the Southern Outdoors Men. And it's called the Collaborator tier.
Yes, sir.
So you can go find that. And I'm sure you think we can put that in the link down below.
Yeah,
so
I'll link it below.
If you're interested in that, you can go down to the link down below in the show notes, and we'll have it linked there so you can go check it out. But yeah, we appreciate everybody that's been a collaborator in the past. We've had some awesome success. Actually had one of our collaborators last year have an unbelievable year on his property, kind of using what we talked about, and went and killed one hell of a nice buck.
Yeah, buddy. So cool, man. Yep. Well, that is all the questions we're going to do this week. Like I said, that question and answer form is up on the website. If you want to go leave a question, I'll also link it in the show notes as well, so you can go down there and leave a question, and we'll start doing these. If we get enough questions, we'll do it every week. Yeah, I like this. Is fun.
Yeah, on the outro breakdown episodes.
On the outro breakdown Thursday, whatever's. We're not good at branding, okay? Anyways, appreciate everybody listening to this one. It's been fun. Hope to see y'all at the Mobile Hunters Expo starting tomorrow. The day after this comes out is when that Mobile Hunters Expo is actually starting. So we'll be there. Come by, see us in the booth. Hope to see a lot of you guys there and shake your hand. You got anything else, Jacob?
No, I'll say this. Hopefully, if everything works out, we're going to have our buddy Scott Seals at the event, and I think he'll be there, I know, on Saturday, and I believe he's going to be bringing the Wizard buck. So he's a listener to the podcast. He's been a guest on the podcast a few times. He's the one that actually killed the Wizard, which is a buck that Andrew and really our buddy Michael was hunting pretty heavily back in 2020. Yeah. And anyways, y'all probably have heard that story. We did a ton of episodes on that deer, and it's a monster. And I think he's going to bring it, and he's going to have it in the booth with us.
Yeah.
So it's going to be awesome. But yeah, appreciate everybody listening. Appreciate all the viewers, too. Again, all the podcasts, both the outro and the main episodes, are going to be put on YouTube as well, guys, for the video podcast. So everything's being filmed. So if you've been enjoying this, you can actually go over and check out the YouTube channels. Just search the Southern Outdoorsman on YouTube. You can find the video tab for the podcast there and check that out. Appreciate all of that support. And guys, we'll catch you back here on the next episode from the Southern Outdoorsman podcast.